It's almost like dance music, but for the underworld. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I am Molly, and in this video I am going to be listening to the album Post Self by Godflesh. Now, Godflesh is quickly becoming one of my favorite bands. I absolutely love their music. So far I've heard their first studio album Street Cleaner, and I've also listened to their most recent album Purge as well, that came out in 2023. So I figured I would just bounce around in their discography and listen to more of their material, and I picked their 8th studio album Post Self to listen to next. This one they released in 2017. And yeah, I'm just really excited to listen to it and see what I'm going to think of this one. Alright, starting this album off is the first song, which is the title track Post Self. Now this one I think I've heard like once or twice a long time ago, but I don't remember how it goes. So yeah, let's get this album started. His vocals are so demented sounding. There's just something so unwithheld about it. It's like this wild animal or something. I love the drums too. There's this clinginess that they have. It's got this very deconstructed, kind of loose sound to it. That bass, oh, it's got such a great tone. Well, that was track 1, Post Self. Like I said at the start, I have heard that song before, and listening to it, I was kind of reminded at just how heavy and oppressive it is. I love the tone of that. And that song was like a perfect blend of the really heavy, intense elements of their first album, Street Cleaner, but there were some really beautiful, kind of drawn out ambient sounds too that reminded me a lot of Purge, their most recent album. And it was kind of fusing those two aspects of their sound. But yeah, from this point on, I have not heard anything from this album, so I'm really curious to see what else we've got in store. But moving on to track 2 is Parasite. His voice sounds like a dog barking. It's got such an intensity to it. See that? How they just switch from the brutal intensity and then it takes on this really like almost beautiful dissipated tone. There's something almost ethereal about it. And the tuning of these guitars, it's got this sort of fuzziness to it. Just a really unique tone, almost like a crackliness. That was track 2, Parasite. I've got to say, for as heavy and oppressive as that song was, it almost had this upbeat sort of dance music style to it. But then they would switch it from that to the really slowed down, kind of dissipated quality too, and they just kept going back and forth between those two sounds. And I find the track name Parasite very fitting. Just something about that song kind of burrowed itself into you, like it had this very repetitive nature to it. It's like it kept driving that one rhythm at you. Alright, up next is track 3 called No Body. There's something so like weirdly upbeat about this album so far. It's almost like dance music, but for the underworld. I'm loving all of the squeaky little industrial sounds going on here. There's something very metallic about its tone. It almost reminds me of being at a dentist's office and getting a filling. There's kind of just this jarring sound kind of drilling into your head. It's just got this very abrasive quality to it. That was track 3, No Body. I absolutely loved all of the little metallic-y sounding elements that they were utilizing on that one. At times it would have this deconstructed, really loose, rattling around sound, but then at the times of that song where it would kind of spread out and become more atmospheric and dissipated with its tone, there was something almost shimmering about the sound of it. I don't know, it's almost like they were fusing just a glimmer of light with all of that dark heaviness. But moving on to track 4 is Mirror of Finite Light. It's like footsteps marching toward you. And then that gong sound too. It's just building up so much suspense. Man, they're using a lot of echoiness here on the vocals. It's creating this really strong atmospheric quality. Sonically, it almost reminds me of dropping a stone in a pond and the ripples are spreading out. That's what these vocals are reminiscent of, just how they echo out like that. That was track 4, Mirror of Finite Light. There was something almost organic sounding about the percussion on that one. I know that Godflesh mostly, if not entirely, uses a drum machine for their percussion, and usually that tends to elicit a more robotic, like very structured rhythm to it, which Godflesh really embraces. On that track though, there was just something about like that gong and everything that they were using, and the percussion had a more hollow sound to it, and it just really stood out because it had kind of a different tone to it. Alright, up next is track 5, which is called Be God. There's such a lightness and a heaviness that they really embrace. I don't know how, but they blend the two beautifully. My God, I don't think I've ever heard the vocals from Godflesh just being this distorted and intense. It almost sounds like static over a radio or something, like they're that distorted. And that ticking too, it reminds me of a clock. That was track 5, Be God. Just an absolute beast of a track. I don't even know how to describe that one. It was like a storm going on in my head when I was listening to that. Of all the bands I've ever heard, Godflesh is absolutely one of the most immersive with their sound. They just have a way of like completely enveloping you with what's going on. There's so much layering that they do, and there's just such a nuancedness to all of their music. It just completely surrounds you, and it's like you're getting sucked into this other world when you're listening to it. But I'm going to continue on with track 6 called The Cyclic End. And just like that, with one little tone change, this song went from this kind of uplifted, hopeful tone, and now there's something sort of unsettling about it. I love how they change it up like that. Yeah, this part is just building up so much suspense. It almost has you on edge when you're listening to it. Like there's an impending doom right around the corner. It almost sounded like crickets chirping there at the very end, but that was track 6, the Cyclic End. Again, a fantastic job merging that sort of lightness with the oppression and all of the heaviness. I loved the suspense that they kind of built up with that track. It just had this very driving steadiness to it, and very ambient too, like especially at the end there when it faded out, it just had this really strong atmospheric quality to it. All right, moving on is track 7 called Pre-Self. Yeah, I don't even know. Is this like some sort of keyboard that they're using? It again has this very subtle sort of crackliness to its tone. There's something so obtuse, maybe is the word I'm looking for, about the sound of this one. It's like all of the sounds just have this really kind of rough, unpolished quality. It's like it's getting closer to you. It's just becoming a little bit more clear and louder with its tone. All right, kind of a hidden little ending on that one. It faded out and then we had that final burst of instrumentation there. But that was track 7, Pre-Self. Very deconstructed with its sound. I loved how kind of loose and unstructured that song sounded. It was like something was just bearing down on you, just bringing so much heaviness and intensity to its sound. But continuing on with track 8 is Mortality Sorrow. This almost sounds like a really distorted electronic organ a little bit. Something about how distorted and heavily electronic these vocals are is reminding me a tiny bit of Crystal Castles. There's definitely a similar tonal quality there. And then it's almost like you floated away there at the end. But that was track 8, Mortality Sorrow. That one was so interesting to listen to. Those vocals were so heavily electronic. I certainly was not expecting that. I loved too, it sounded like an electronic organ that they were using. Just so many different effects on that track. But moving on is track 9 called In Your Shadow. Again, the tone of that bass, oh, I love it. It's so sludgy. Yeah, see how this is almost like dance music in a way? It's just got this extra heaviness to it, but these beats and everything, it's like it could be playing at a club or something. That was track 9, In Your Shadow. Again, really heavily distorted vocals on that one. They were really pushed in the background too, very faint. It almost felt like a demon or something kind of creeping up on you, a little bit more restrained, but they brought the intensity with all of that tension that they built up. But moving on to the final song on Post Self is track 10 called The Infinite End. Man, the sound of this track is so thick and viscous. It's just spreading out. He's really drawing these words out too. It's adding to that really expansive quality that this song has. That bass, I can't get over it. It just adds so much to Godflesh's sound. They do some really unique percussive stuff, but that bass just anchors everything, and it just brings an amazing tone to their music. Well, that was track 10, The Infinite End. A very fitting title for sure. It was like that song was just stretched out. It had a very continuous sound to it. It was almost like a cloud or something, like you were floating up to heaven. And even the vocal delivery, there was something kind of godly about it. It just had this really immense quality to its tone. How he was drawing the words out, really stretching out the syllables, and it had this distortion on it too, where it was kind of unclear what he was saying. Well, that concludes my reaction to Post Self, the 8th studio album from Godflesh. They definitely leaned in a little bit more of an electronic direction on this album compared to the other 2 Godflesh records I've heard. They still had all of that amazing heaviness and intensity though that I love from Godflesh. The title track Post Self was definitely a favorite of mine. That one I did recognize once I started listening to it. I've heard that one before, but it just has such a demented quality to its sound. I love how dark that one is. Also track 8, Mortality Sorrow, I loved how heavily electronic that one went. And honestly, my favorite with one listen on this album might actually be track 5, Be God. That one was so intense. It sounded like I was just being surrounded by demons or something in the underworld. Just a very heavy, very dark track. Definitely be sure to let me know in the comments what other Godflesh albums you want me to listen to, because I am absolutely loving their stuff. And yeah, as usual, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.